Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Gabester here. Today we are looking at a Throne of Thunder guide to Iron Qon. And this is the 10th boss in Throne of Thunder. So this encounter is really a series of unique phases, and some of the abilities carry over from one phase to the other, but for the most part, each phase is its own entity. So easiest thing to do is talk about each phase in order and how to go about them, and then put it all together at the end. So let's get started. So this first phase is the fire phase against Rorschach. And this phase, like the first three phases actually, you're fighting the boss on one of his mounts. And it's his mount that sort of dictates the abilities that he uses and has access to. Until the final phase, when you fight the boss by himself after killing all of his poor little ads and I guess pissing him off a great deal in the process. So, whoops. So the fire phase is always the first phase that you will go against, and this is lucky because this is by far the most difficult phase. It really has the most abilities to deal with, and it's by far the most damaging phase as well. Most potential for spike deaths and all that stuff. So, the first ability that you'll notice, and this is really true of all three phases initially, is that Iron Qon will throw his spear at a random raid member, and when it lands, it distributes lines of elemental badness, about 5 of them, in random directions. So you can clearly see there was a spear in the top right, and there's another one below us right now. So in the fire phase, these lines basically just do a stacking dot that is burning cinders, and it does 15,000 damage per second per stack. So if you stay in it for a couple seconds, you're going to get 2 or 3 stacks, and that's a lot of extra damage with what else is going on. So be very careful about your positioning relative to your teammates and crossing over those lines when you don't have to. Now, in addition to throwing spear, the main mechanic here for the fire phase is energy. So you'll notice that Rorschach has an energy bar in the bottom center of the screen there. He gains energy at a rate of 5 energy per second, very rapidly. If he gets to 100 energy, he will start to channel Molten Overload, which does 80,000 damage per second to every raid member for 10 seconds. So 800,000 total. It's obviously a lot of damage, and you don't want to get hit by it. So technically you could survive that with a lot of cooldowns going, but generally speaking, you should try just to avoid that by keeping his energy level low. So throughout the phase, he will cast Molten Inferno every 8 seconds on average, and this does 80,000 fire damage to everyone. You can't avoid it. But it also costs him 10 energy to cast it. However, because he gains basically 10 energy every 2 seconds, but he only casts Molten Inferno every 8 seconds, you have to get rid of his energy elsewise. And the way you do that is by forcing him to cast Unleashed Flame. Now this ability he will use anytime he has 30 energy or greater, and if he notices 3 or more players stacked up within 10 yards of each other. If 3 or more players are stacked up and he has enough energy to cast, 30 or more, he will cast Unleash Flame on that group of players, which does 700,000 damage, split evenly among all players that are stacked there in 10 yards. It also applies a Scorched debuff, which increases fire damage taken by 20% per stack, and this lasts 30 seconds. So, obviously 700,000 damage split among a few people is quite a hefty amount. And then if you get Scorch stacks on top of that, you're looking at a lot of spike damage. So handling this is really the key. So the most important thing to think about for Unleash Flame and Scorch timing is that the energy rates dictate how often you can allow Scorched to drop off with a 30-second duration. So if you tried to ensure that every raid member was able to drop their Scorched stack before getting a new application to keep the count low, you would actually allow him to gain energy slightly faster than he is spending it. So if you look at the formula here, remember he gains energy 5 per second, and he will spend 10 energy every 8 seconds on Molten Inferno automatically. And then by stacking, you can force him to spend 30 energy every 30 seconds, since Scorch debuff lasts 30 seconds, per trio of grouped players that get Unleashed Flames. Remember that you have to have 3 or more people stacked up to trigger Unleashed Flame, and since you have 10 players in your raid, you can use 3 different groups of 3 or more. So this comes out to 10 over 8 plus 30 over 30 times 3, or 4.25 energy per second. So if you were playing absolutely perfectly like a robot, able to ensure that you get the restack the moment that your stack drops off, and so on and so forth, even then he would still hit 100 energy after about 2 minutes time. And that's a very short period to get through this phase in, even if you could actually pull that off, which no human can do. So instead of waiting every 30 seconds before your group stacks up to get a new stack, you're going to have to purposely get your stack a little bit earlier and keep it going up based on his energy. So the best method we found for this was to set an arbitrary time for how much time you have left on your Scorched, at which point your group stacks up. And we did this a little bit based on energy levels and the stack count. So we decided to do it at 7 seconds, and it seemed to work out pretty well. The basic idea here is that everybody stacks up at the beginning. Doesn't matter where he starts doing his debuffs. And you keep getting stacks on you until you get 2 or 3 stacks on your group. And then you spread out and let it fall off and once it falls off, then you can stack up once again. So this does not completely negate his energy gain, but by allowing him to chain cast up to a certain threshold of stacks, then allowing yourself to reset, you can keep him from getting high energy for quite a bit longer. The downside is that you have to heal through the damage of Unleashed Flame with 2 to sometimes 3 stacks all in your group. You shouldn't have to heal the damage from a 3-stack hit as long as people don't screw up. But yeah, it's possible. So just be careful of that. But the basic idea is you stack up when you have no buff or when you have under 7 seconds remaining, as long as your stack count is under whatever threshold your group decided on. So 3 is probably a safe number. And then once you get to that 3 mark, then you wait for a reset, and then you proceed to stack up again for the cast once more. And just repeat this process and over until he's dead. Now it's also worth noting that the berserk time for this fight is long. It's a 12-minute berserk. And because of that, we didn't really know what to expect in the later phases in terms of difficulty. But knowing this phase was the trickiest one by far, we decided to lust after a couple attempts and start doing bloodlust and all that on the first phase here to get through it faster. And it seemed to work out well. So arguably you might need it for the last phase if your DPS is not high. But I would also say that if your DPS is not high, then by the time you get to that last phase, your bloodlust will be up again because, that's 2 minutes over the 10-minute mark that you still have before berserk in the final phase. So theoretically, you can use it again anyway. So I would recommend bloodlust and all that stuff at the start to push through fire phase as quick as you can. So once you kill the fire mount, the lightning phase begins. And this summons Quet'zal, and he hops on and you start the same thing over. So as I mentioned, the phases get progressively easier until the end. And so this one is not the easiest, but it's definitely easier than fire. The basic idea is spread out the raid on this one, and when someone gets a debuff called Arc Lightning, or Arcing Lightning rather, they'll become stunned, it will absorb healing on them, and they will also do some minor damage to anyone nearby. However, this can be removed by any player that simply right-clicks on them. They'll get a little cogwheel. You can just right-click the player and remove it. Now, both these players will retain Arcing Lightning and do small damage, about 30,000 every 2 seconds, to anyone within about 10 yards of them. So again, just stay spread out. You can avoid most of that damage. Now here you see the tail end of the main difficulty with this phase, which is the Windstorm ability. So this is cast about every little over a minute, and when it starts, he ports the entire raid into the center of the room, and you're stunned briefly until he releases you, at which point you can move around freely, and you're stuck in this circle area of Windstorm. There's also tornadoes rushing around, and if a tornado hits you, it will suck you up, do heavy damage to you, and move you away from the raid most likely. So that's bad. The worst part though is that while you're within the Windstorm area, you get damage, healing, and absorption reduction by 80%. So it's essentially almost pointless to try to heal people from the damage they're taking in there while you are inside the thing. Now this is only applied to healing output from players with the debuff. It does not reduce healing received. So if a healer gets out of the Windstorm afflicted area, which you should see in a moment here, that healer then heals full once again. So what I found as a healer is to try to save up any sort of burst healing cooldowns I have. As soon as I step out, lose the debuff, then spam my heart out to top people off as much as possible. And that was generally the best way to go about it. That said, getting out of there faster is better for everyone. So save your movement boost abilities. So any form of sprint, druid raid sprint's really good. Warlock portals or self portals for monks, that kind of thing, really good. Blink for mages, I don't know, anything you got, right? But the point is to get out without touching a tornado. If you get hit by a tornado, it's far worse than if you were to stay in there for 5 extra seconds but avoid tornadoes. Trust me, you do not want to get sucked up by a tornado, because you will not only take a bunch of damage, but be out of heal range almost certainly, and then die pretty much. So take a little bit longer if necessary, and anything your healers can do to get out quickly is really going to benefit the rest of the raid especially. So I was able to use Monk Teleport most of the time when I remembered anyway, and I think our Paladin healer said that Bubble worked as well. So anything you have that can get you out of that storm will be advisable. It's also a great time for all your raid members to use personal cooldowns to mitigate damage. Anything that prevents them from dying in this phase is going to matter, not very much in the next phase. So you can easily use it here and then have it up again for the final phase when you might need it again. The last thing that's barely worth mentioning, but I should do so, is, again, he throws a spear during this phase. He's about to do it now. And it sends out the, arcs of damage depending on the element type. So here, of course, it's lightning. In this case, it does damage if you stand in it, but it also gives you a stacking debuff. And if you receive 3 stacks, you are stunned for quite a while, but it can be dispelled. The stun can be. So just try not to pass through those any more than necessary. The only time you should have to pass through one is if you're not in range of clicking someone that has the arcing. So what we try to do, generally speaking, is to partner up our ranged players that were potential arcing targets, so that those 2 players could remain somewhat close to each other, and therefore not have to cross over very many electric beams. The other major thing you should try to focus on is tanking the boss near the entrance of the room here where we are on the west. During this second phase, third phase, and the final phase, try to keep him over here because the tornadoes will persist throughout the rest of the fight from this point forward. But generally speaking, they do not come to the cubby that's where the entrance is. So it's much easier to avoid them by being over here. And plus, you want to run out here from the windstorm anyway, so you're already over here. So just try to keep the boss by the entrance side, and it'll be much safer. So the third phase is Frost or Dammrin as the mount. And once again, this is even easier than the previous phase. Basically, the main gimmick is an ability called Dead Zone, which the boss is using right there. So you can see for 7 seconds, he channels 2 dead zones. And these are just 2 shields that will block 2 technically, 2 of 4 sides randomly of the boss. So when he's blocking that side, you've seen this gimmick on Will the Emperor, he will be impenetrable from that direction. So all attacks will miss him. So your ranged DPS especially need to stay close enough that they can sidestep to get at an angle that allows them to attack still past a dead zone. Now obviously you can't stack up because once again you still have spear and various AE damage, so you need to stay spread somewhat, but otherwise it's pretty basic. So spear damage in this case, it does frost, and it also slows your movement and haste basically by 25% per stack. So you don't want to get more than 1 second of it basically, or 2. If you get 4, you'll be 100% reduced. So that sucks. So don't do that. Now, our paladin found that you can freedom out of it, so it seems that perhaps things that reduce or remove movement impairing effects will also remove that debuff. We didn't really test it a lot. It wasn't a big deal because there isn't much else to worry about, but you can see sometimes the room can get pretty full of that frost stuff, so be careful of that. The final thing is, well, actually 2 more things. The most dangerous ability on this phase is Shatter. So one player will get randomly frozen, and after a short period, no more than 5 seconds, that player will shatter, and it deals frost damage to everyone in the raid. Just an initial blast of damage, basically. And the other thing to do really is keep people topped off in health. It's not a huge amount of damage, so as long as you don't have a lot of damage staying over from the previous phase, like lightning damage, and you're spread out plenty and you don't get hit by spear, then you shouldn't really be in danger from shatter at all. He also will reflect damage done to him during this phase. So it's not a huge amount. It's 10%, which is almost irrelevant, but technically you can hurt yourself if you get a couple big hits. So I guess technically you should be careful, but again, 10% is so minor. So, don't kill yourself basically, but after doing something like Council with reflection from that, this seems like very minor amounts. So that's it. Frost phase is, like I said, it's very easy. Just play it cool. You have a long time in this fight, so hopefully you shouldn't have to focus on DPS more than killing yourselves or anything. And once Dammrin dies, then we're on to the final phase against Iron Qon himself. So, when the final boss spawns, he's no longer on his mount, and he's pissed. Now, I'm tempted to say that the pattern continues, and this is the easiest fight, or easiest phase by far. That's definitely true that mechanically it is the simplest. Literally all your raid should do is stack up behind the boss once the debuffs from the previous phase have worn off, so you're not doing anything bad to people. And that's it. You just stand here. He doesn't do anything that will harm you based on your position, and the only extra abilities he has are to empower the tornadoes. So you can kind of see in the top right, one of the tornadoes is flaming, and there's also ice tornadoes as well. But because you're near the entrance here, they almost never seem to come over here. I don't think we ever had to dodge one, even though we only saw this phase twice. I'm pretty sure twice. So it may be possible, but it's rare, certainly. So you can see there, the fire one looks like it's coming, and then it just turns away. So other than that, in this final phase, when he throws his spear, instead of smashing it on the ground and hitting people, he actually just throws it down, and then he starts using fist smash. And this is the main mechanic here. So he'll just slam the ground for 25,000 physical damage every 0.75 seconds, which is a weird number, for 7 seconds. And this damage increases every time he gets a stack of Rising Anger, which increases his damage done by 10% per stack. So this is sort of the soft enrage mechanic, obviously. As the phase continues, the fist damage will become higher and higher. So because of that, you could argue that this is not the easiest phase, but again, in terms of strategy, it's very basic. So really it's all a matter of your healing strength and cooldown usage. So we used 2 healers, and it was plenty fine. We had plenty of cooldowns remaining. But 3 healers could go a long time in this phase, I think, pretty safely, since the raid should never have to move, hopefully, for tornadoes. And that's it. So once you can just manage the fist damage when it gets a high stack of anger, then you're pretty much home free. And that is Iron Qon. So good luck, and thank you for watching.